Earlier this month, there was a massively huge earthquake in Syria, and in Turkey, which I'm sure you're all aware about, right? So what exactly happened, right? This massively giant earthquake, a 7.8 on the Richter scale, hit Turkey at February 6th, right? 7.6 is gigantic. Like basically anything over 6 is like huge. Like even 5, like a 5-point earthquake is still pretty damn big, and if you're like right on top of that, it can really mess you up. But each, as if I understand it right, every point that you go up in the Richter scale, like full point, means that the quake is like increased. The intensity is increased by a factor of 10. So a 2-point earthquake is 10 times as strong as a 1-point earthquake, right? So if you can just imagine it like that, at least I think that's how it works, right? So when we're talking about something like, you know what we need to do? We need to put on shape dynamics. There we go. Like that. There we go. So if you're talking about something like a, 7.8 scale earthquake, that's massive, right? Anyway, this quake was hit Turkey and then also Syria, and in Turkey alone, roughly 41,791 buildings across 10 provinces were destroyed. Completely destroyed during the initial quake, which left 150,000 people homeless, right? So if you can imagine, 150,000 people, that's like the size of a small city, a small town. That's how many people are homeless. So imagine, if you live in a small town out there, with roughly that many people, just imagine everyone in your town being homeless after like one day. And that's what's going on here, right? So this is not something to be laughing at. This is this damage is ridiculously huge, right? Is what we're talking about here. The government there in Turkey said that at least another 61,000 buildings were going to have to be demolished. They've just been damaged beyond repair. So who knows how many people are going to end up homeless, are going to end up becoming internal refugees because of this, right? When they say internal refugees, that means people that, they're within the same country, So they're still refugees, but they can't stay where they are. They have to move on to some other place within the country, right? And that's what's going on in Syria. Crazy, crazy stuff. Estimated damage is $87 billion, right, on the low end, and that is still climbing. That's just a rough estimate as of how much damage has been done. The real big hit, though, is going to be in economic loss, right? So if you think about, it's not just the money that it's going to cost to replace these buildings, right? And to replace all the infrastructure that's destroyed. Things like power plants, bridges, roads, telephone poles, stuff like that. It's not just that. It's also the loss in economic activity. Because, you're building that, let's imagine that you work at a McDonald's or a Starbucks or something, right? Huge giant earthquake happens. Your building is damaged beyond repair. That also, not only does that mean that building is gone, that also means you don't have a job anymore. Because you can't go to work now because the building you work at is destroyed. So all of these people, that just lost their jobs in addition to their homes. So not only do they not have a place to live, they don't have any money now in order to try to find another place to live. So they're kind of screwed all around, right? 150,000 of them. And who knows how many more just are going to be impacted, economically, that just haven't lost their homes. Luckily for them, they haven't lost their homes, but they lost their jobs. Well, it's not like stuff is suddenly going to be free just because there was a huge earthquake, right? So these people are in some serious trouble. Okay. Which brings us to casualties. And this is the real heartbreaking part of this, right? Roughly 39,000 people were killed just in the initial quake. 39,672 dead. People that were there one day, gone the next, because this quake, made all of their houses fall down on top of them, right? A further 108,068 injuries, right? These are probably low end, and these numbers are going to be revised in the coming weeks and months. As the last time I saw, as of a few days ago when I was gathering all this information, that they were still pulling dead bodies out of the rubble in Turkey. Right. So I want to show you something here. Let me just open this up. This is from Reddit. Right, let me just get everything ready here. Okay, refresh that. Come on, refresh, damn it. Okay, this is here. This here is from Reddit. Let me just make this full size quiet. Let's get rid of the audio on that. Turn that down. And come over here and turn on my window. So this here is oh wow, hang on a second. Let me just make sure. Okay, good. Hit play. So you can kind of see what's going on here. This is the damage that we saw. And you can see this is the same street before and after, right? Which is a place called Antakya, I think. So the upper video was taken in December. You can see Christmas decorations and stuff like that. Apparently they celebrate Christmas in Turkey. I didn't know that, I guess it's not a majority Muslim country or anything. I know Turkey was a tourist spot for Europeans, so maybe they have all this stuff out there for people who are doing, who are on vacation and that kind of thing. Or maybe there's a big, population of Christians in Turkey. I'm not really aware of that. But anyway, enough people there celebrate Christmas to where there's decorations out and sales and things going on. So yeah, you can kind of see how bad it is. I mean, if you just look at the bottom there, completely destroyed. So it looks like a war zone, doesn't it? Completely destroyed. Just bricks and trash and rubble and debris all over the place, right? And they're still finding bodies. Still finding bodies in this place. So this is not a good time, man. These people have been hit super hard. Let's go ahead and turn this off for now, right? Let me just go ahead and get rid of that. And we'll exit out of this. I'll put this down in the chat for you guys so that you can check it out yourself. Where's the chat thing? There we go. I will get used to Twitch. There's the chat thing if you want to go see what I was just looking at. Go ahead and turn that off. Pretty crazy stuff, right? Here's everybody please do some hopes and prayers and actually donate some money and stuff for the people in Turkey, because they definitely need it. Now, I would like to bring to your attention another quake, which happened a little close to home for me. About 30 years ago, in 1994, right? 28 years ago now, I guess. 29 years, actually. So, yeah, it's been quite a while. And this is the Northridge earthquake, which happened in Northridge, California, which is a suburb north of Los Angeles and pretty close to my hometown. I grew up not too far away from there. So I was actually part of this quake, right? This was in 1994. It was a 6.7 earthquake in the San Fernando Valley. Not quite as large as the Turkey quake, the Turkey-Syria quake, but I can tell you it was not a good time because I remember this very well. I was 18 when this thing hit. It was not fun. It hit at 4:30 in the morning, and I had just gone to sleep maybe half an hour before because I was 18, young, and I didn't have any responsibility, so I used to stay up all night drawing and shit like that, right? So that's what I was doing there. And I remember waking up, because I had just barely drifted off to sleep. And the building was shaking, and it was terrifying. And here's the thing, right, folks? Quakes happen all the time in Los Angeles. It's a very common thing. You get, little small quakes every now and then that last a couple of seconds, right? And they're not a big deal. You get used to them pretty quick. It's like, oh, another earthquake. Okay, just relax. It's cool. And the difference here is that this one just started and it was huge. The entire building was shaking back and forth. It was like something out of a movie. And it just kept going and going and going and going. And it felt like forever. And it was really only somewhere around 45 seconds, right? If even that, may have been even shorter than that. It felt like it went on for like 5 minutes. I'm not even kidding. It was terrifying, right? If you've never been in a giant freaking earthquake like that, it is the most terrifying thing. Oh my god. I was literally, you will crap your pants. It is incredibly terrifying, right? And it just kept going and going, and it's loud, and stuff is falling off the walls. Windows are rattling, and I'm like afraid that my bed was right up against a window, and I'm like, should I try to move? Is this window gonna shatter on me? Terrifying, right? Then the lights, that stops, and then all the lights go out, and it's like, oh crap, because the power just went off. And then you start hearing everybody outside in your house freaking out, screaming. Luckily, everybody was cool. No one was hurt. And luckily, my house was not incredibly damaged too bad, but there was some serious damage around in the valley where I lived. It was not a good time, folks, right? Estimates say that the amount of damage is roughly around $50 billion, which translates into 2023 dollars. That translates to around 93 billion. So, yeah, not not completely not we didn't get off scot-free there, And it was pretty bad. There were some people who died, things like a lot of things like apartment buildings collapsed, right? There was some damage to the I-5 freeway, which at that point was considered the most busy freeway in the United States, not just in California, but the most busy freeway in the entire country was the I-5, which I wouldn't be surprised if it still is. I don't know if it is or not. There were parts of the valley, parts of Northridge, which actually looked pretty bad. They didn't look as bad as what you saw in Turkey, but pretty bad stuff. I would like to show to you guys this picture that I clipped and saved so that you can see it. Give me 1 second here, folks. Let's just turn this on again. So here's an example of some of the damage. This was from the Northridge Fashion Center, which was right under the epicenter of the quake, right? So the San Andreas Fault runs right underneath the Northridge Fashion Center as a shopping mall, which has since been rebuilt. But yeah, and this was, I think, a Macy's at that time. And you can see just half of the building completely destroyed. Just you know, and I was looking, there was a specific picture that I was looking for because I remember seeing the news broadcast where they were flying around in helicopters and they would show this mall, and it was like, it wasn't just this building, it was like the entire mall, like half of the mall just collapsed, like split right down the middle, and you could see it, and it's like, thank God it happened at 4:30 in the morning and it didn't happen during business hours, because like hundreds of people could have been crushed, right? So, and there was stuff like this all around town. Let me go ahead and turn this off for now. It wasn't just a shopping mall that like collapsed. It was like, all around town, like apartment buildings, and I remember a friend of my sister, tree fell on her car, and you would see stuff like that all around people's houses, like chimneys falling off of people's houses, and trees falling on top of people's houses, stuff like that, right? Pretty bad stuff. But here's the thing, folks, right? Even though it was pretty bad, and there was all these, there was $93 billion worth of damage, right? Only 57 people were killed. And there were about 8,700 reported injuries, right? So, how come in the United States there's an earthquake, 57 people get killed, right? And in Turkey there is a comparable quake, which admittedly was bigger, but by not that much. It was a 7.8 versus 6.7. So maybe, I guess that is pretty big, but still, they're comparable, right? How come in Turkey, when a quake that size hits, 39,000 people die? And when in the United States, when a quake that size hits, only 57 people die? Why is that? It's because of regulations. That's the reason why. It's because in the United States, in Los Angeles, they take regulations seriously, right? They did even before the quake hit. And then after the quake hit, they went back and they reassessed what happened. They saw the buildings that collapsed and the ones that didn't, and they, updated the building codes and things like that. And then the city of Los Angeles forced building owners to actually retrofit their buildings, right? And that's why now, if another earthquake hits Los Angeles, right, it will probably be of the same size. There will probably be roughly the same amount of dead people or less, because, the regulations were enforced, right? In Turkey, not only is it much looser, they have much looser regulations and building codes. How does that look, by the way? That eye. Yeah, it looks alright. Not only are the regulations looser and things like that, but in 2019, the president there, Erdogan, pushed through legislation that allowed property owners who had problems with construction not being up to code like that, basically gave them amnesty. And that was a thing because apparently there was a huge problem with shifty contractors and buildings not being built up to code. And instead of doing the right thing, which is forcing like building owners to actually pay to retrofit their buildings so that they don't collapse during an earthquake, he instead just gave them all amnesty and said, okay, you don't have to do it anymore, and everything was cool. In fact, he actually ran on that. He ran on, the guy Erdogan, the president of Turkey, ran on the fact that he was giving amnesty to these contractors and that they weren't going to force people to, build their buildings up to code, right? Well, look what happens. See, here's the thing that people don't, your libertarian friends out there, your conservative friends out there, right? Here's the thing, that when the people that say that regulations are bad, and it's all just the government choosing winners and losers and stuff like that. Here's what they forget to tell you, folks, right? Regulations are there to protect people, right? And yeah, you can make the argument that, okay, maybe some regulations are, targeted towards specific companies or whatever, or maybe some of them are unnecessary or whatever. You can make those. Arguments, and even sometimes they may even be true, right? But the whole point of having something like this, like building codes, safety regulations, right? Of having food inspectors, for example, of having like food and drug inspectors, that kind of thing, right? Of making sure that prescription drugs are not pushed through without proper testing, right? All stuff like that. All that stuff is there to protect people. That's what they're there for. They're there to make sure that you have the confidence that when you buy a house, it's not going to collapse during an earthquake. When you buy some medicine that's supposed to help you, it doesn't instead kill you, right? That when you go to the store and you buy some food, that it's not filled with, bacteria and salmonella. And you can buy some eggs and not have to worry about getting food poisoning. You can buy some fish and not have to worry about getting worms. You can buy some beef, not have to worry about getting something that puts you in the hospital. That's what regulations are there for. That's what regulations are good in that sense, right? Did I just turn off my stream? Okay, no, I didn't. Okay, good. Just wondering, I couldn't see my stream there. Right. And that's the difference. The difference is Los Angeles took it seriously, right? Turkey did not take it seriously. And now we're seeing the consequences of that, right? So here's the thing, okay? Get some water there. What, because regulations are anathema to libertarians, to anarcho-capitalists, to conservatives, they don't believe in them. They hate them. They like to cut them all the time and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they say, oh, we don't need it. And so you say, okay, if you were to have this conversation with your average conservative friend, whatever brand of conservatism they believe in, right? And you were to say to them, okay, well, what do we do in a situation like this? Okay, you don't want to have the government enforce these rules in order to protect people. So what do you propose in order to keep people protected, right? How do we ensure, for example, let's just use building codes as an example, right? We know that if you build buildings up to a certain standard, right, using safety codes, things like that, building codes. If you build buildings up to a certain standard, then they won't collapse when an earthquake hits of up to a certain amount, right? And this includes materials. This includes reinforcing the structure in certain ways, stuff like that, right? I'm not a contractor, so I'm not an expert, but I'm just using this as an example, right? So we know that that's a thing, and we also know that any given contractor or construction company wants to save as much money as possible, because the cheaper they can make that building, the more money they get to walk home with, right? So how do we encourage then, let's take contractors or corporations, building companies, things like that, construction companies, how do we encourage them to do the right thing to build their buildings up to standard without using regulations, right? What's the conservative, libertarian, anarcho-capitalist solution to that if we're not allowed to pass a regulation to use the force of law to force them to do this, right? And usually the answer I get back is, well, It's like this. These companies, right, want to make money, and they know that if you build shoddy buildings, then people will no longer want to do business with you. So, because they don't want to take a hit on their reputation, they will then build safe buildings so that their company gets a reputation for having safe buildings, and then people, then everybody wins. Then we don't have to use the force of the government to force them to do these things, right? And people have buildings that don't fall down on them. And the thing is, that's 100% grade A bullshit. That does not that is not a thing that happens. And we can see evidence of it right here. Because that's the first off, right? When you're talking about a private company, it's the whole reason that you have a company is to make money, right? Well, if you make more money by cheaping out on your materials, then what do you think is going to happen? Do you think that the desire for a good company reputation somehow overrides the desire to make a shitload of money? Like, no, not at all. Right? And we see evidence of that every day, right? Every time there's a recall for something, did you know, for example, like recently there was a recall, Tesla did a recall of cars because the self-driving mechanism is crap. It doesn't work. And we keep getting all these stories of Tesla's pulling over and stopping and causing 17 car pileups and all this other crap, because the self-driving thing in Teslas is worthless. And if you try to drive, self-drive a Tesla, it's taking your life into your hands, and only a moron would do it. It does not work as advertised, right? So they very quietly recalled a whole bunch of cars for that reason, right? Every time that happens, every time that you hear something in the news about, say, lettuce or cabbage or something that has a salmonella outbreak, or spinach. Remember that? Remember a few years ago, spinach was recalled, right? Because it was contaminated with some kind of bacteria, right? Because it wasn't stored correctly. Every time you hear something about that is evidence of whatever company cutting corners, right? Here was another one that I just saw. A bunch of bottled Frappuccino from Starbucks recently was recalled because there were broken glass inside of the bottles, right? How does something like that happen? How does something like broken glass get inside of the bottles at the bottling plant, right? It's because they were cutting corners. They were cheaping out on their inspectors, because there's supposed to be people there that inspect these things to make sure that broken glass doesn't show up in your bottles, right? And they were cheaping out on it. They're either not hiring enough people, right? Or they're making it go by too fast. Usually that's what it is. They just don't hire enough people. Most of the time when you get these sort of food recalls especially, right? Because their QA is just not good enough. They're not, their quality inspections and stuff like that, not good enough, right? Because they're cutting corners on it, because they want to pocket that cash. The more Frappuccinos they can ship, the more money they make, right? And just taking too long to actually go through and look at, take a couple of seconds to look at each bottle to make sure there ain't no glass in it, right? So that's evidence of that every time. So we see that kind of thing that happens constantly at any given time. There's recalls of products all over the place for one dangerous reason or another, right? None of the idea that they want to maintain their reputations, it's laughable, right? It's absolutely laughable. And it's just simply not a thing.